welcome to everybody around the world. We're all in our respective bubbles somewhere, hopefully safely and happily. A new normal for us at the moment. But thanks to technology, we can meet up. Liz, you're in Dunedin. I'm here in Canterbury. I'm Julian Yates. I work for Black Cat. I'm a skipper. I've been there for 10 years. Been working on boats for over 20 years, so I love being out on the waves. And I'm going to be talking with Liz Slooten, a researcher at the Otago University. She's going to introduce herself. So Liz, welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to chat with you in any case, and especially for this kind of purpose. So yeah, like you, I love being on the water. So as a little girl, I would be going out in kayaks and little sailing dinghies and what have you. And my parents had a shipwrecking yard, not a shipbuilding yard, but a shipwrecking yard. So there's plenty of boaty stuff happening there. And then at some point I emigrated to New Zealand, and then a bit later, about 3 years later, started studying Hectors Dolphins. So since 1984, I've been doing research on Hectors Dolphins together with my partner, Steve Dawson. And since 1990, we've been working at Otago University and continuing that research. And also every summer there are students going out in their own boat doing research around Banks Peninsula on the Hectors Dolphins.
So Liz, I mean, we should really set the scene. I've said I'm in Christchurch here. We're based in Akaroa, which is an old volcano, luckily very old, 6 million years ago when it last erupted. So we don't have to worry too much about that today. It could be a little bit warmer. We've had a great autumn, but it's starting to get chilly. And you're in Dunedin, which is another volcano down there. Nicely extinct, these volcanoes here.
Thank goodness.
Well, the first question from what we said, Liz, why Hectors Dolphins? What drew you to Hectors Dolphins specifically all those years ago, 30 years ago plus, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. Almost 35 years ago.
Wow.
And so basically what happened was Steve was doing research for a booklet about strandings. So the head of the zoology department at Auckland University, where we were students, had asked him to write a little book saying, if there's a whale stranding, this is what you need to do. And he quickly found out, it's so different for each species. So if you find a dolphin on the beach, especially one that's as small as a Hectors dolphin, you basically tuck it under your arm and put it back in the water. Whereas if it's a sperm whale, you can forget about that. And you can forget about trying to pull at its tail with a tractor, because you'll probably pull its bloody tail off. It ended up him having to write a little guide to the whales and dolphins of New Zealand to incorporate into this booklet about what to do at a whale stranding. And in that research, we found out there's actually very little known about Hectors dolphins. So New Zealand's so lucky to have its very own dolphin species. And there'd been very little study of it up to that time. So we decided, let's do our PhD research, our studies on this dolphin. And so Steve was setting out to study their sounds, and I set out to study their behaviour. And then we started finding various dead dolphins floating around in the water on beaches. And so we actually moved our research towards the conservation side a lot more than what we had intended originally. So we ended up doing lots of work on reproduction, how fast can they breed, how many are actually being caught in fishing nets, and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Now, I heard you say recently over 8,000 kilometres, was it, that you travelled around the coast of New Zealand counting and watching Hectors dolphins?
No. Yeah, so it's quite funny. I remember, telling our parents, we're going to get into this 4-metre inflatable and go all the way around the South Island and parts of the North Island in short trips, I might add. And it's kind of hard to believe. I don't know how I would respond if I had a teenager or someone in their young 20s as a child and they decided they wanted to do that. I don't know what I would say. But one way or another, we managed to convince our parents that this was a good idea. And one way or another, we managed to convince some people to help us fund the whole deal. So yeah, we set off, and it was pretty lean pickings at the beginning. It was like every time we had to get some petrol, it was, okay, $50 out of your wallet, $50 out of my wallet, and we'll fill up these petrol tanks. But then later things started sort of snowballing when we could see that actually you can get close to these dolphins and do research on them and find out about their biology. Then we started to get a little bit more funny, and things took off from there.
So that was in the 1970s, is that right?
1980s. So let's see, I arrived in New Zealand in 77.
Right.
Started studying at Auckland Uni for a bachelor's in 78. Finished a master's in 82 or 83, and then in 84 we started the Hectors Dolphin study.
Right. So the population estimates around the 1970s, 29,000, is that right?
Well, yeah, so the first estimate was from us going around the coast in a 4-metre inflatable. Right. It was 2 people, and one of them could stand up. Whichever one of us was in the front at the time could stand up and hang on to a rope, but whoever was driving, using the outboard, had to sit down because it was a normal kind of stick drive outboard. It wasn't, it wasn't anything with a steering wheel or anything. So only one of us could stand up. And then in the late 90s, we did another survey, that time with a much larger boat, a catamaran with an observation platform. So we now had 3 people standing up on a platform with about a 6-metre eye height, and using binoculars which had a compass in them, so you could tell if you saw a group of dolphins, what was the angle, where were they with respect to the boat. And you had a little ruler in those same binoculars that would tell you how far down from the horizon were those dolphins, i.e. how far away from the boat.
Right.
And then what you can do is, if you imagine a kind of a graph of seeing lots of dolphins close to the boat and not so many further away and dropping off with distance from the boat, then you can use that curve, that relationship of how many dolphins do you see with respect to how far from the boat. You can use that information to figure out how many dolphins you've got per square kilometre. And then later still, we did a bunch of aerial surveys as well with a plane, with the same kind of principle, where you use, in this case, another piece of equipment that measures the angle from straight downwards to where you can see the dolphins. And so as the methods got more sophisticated, larger teams of people, better equipment, much more expensive, of course, as well, and also we were able to go much further offshore. So the very latest surveys have been done by Ministry for Primary Industries, go 20 nautical miles offshore. That's about roughly 40 kilometres offshore. So as you might expect, the numbers have gone up in terms of being able to cover a larger area, go further offshore, etc. But interestingly, when you compare the numbers between the very last survey, which was done by Ministry for Primary Industries, and the last lot of surveys that Otago University did, that we did, then actually everywhere except the east coast of the South Island, those numbers are similar or lower.
Right.
So the most recent estimates are similar or lower than the last ones that we did. In fact, down by about 1,000 dolphins. And so, roughly speaking, 5,500 dolphins everywhere except for the east coast of the South Island. And then the east coast of the South Island is a kind of a mystery, because the most recent survey by Ministry for Primary Industries, their estimate is 5 times ours. And given that this survey goes further offshore, you might expect a few more, like maybe even double. But 5 times, that's just not credible. And so there's been a lot of discussion about that for a few years now, and that still hasn't been resolved. So East Coast, South Island, we don't really know how many. Everywhere else, roughly 5,500. Very simply, I would say about 10,000 Hectors dolphins around the country. And Maui dolphin, which is a separate subspecies, so the North Island Hectors dolphins are so different genetically that they are called something different. They're called Maui dolphin. So they're still the same species as Hectors dolphin, but not the same subspecies. A bit like in the old day, we used to have like North Island kokako and South Island kokako. Those North Island dolphins, the Maui dolphins, there's only 57 individuals 1 year and older. So they are in serious trouble. They are like teetering on the edge of extinction. And there are actually a few South Island populations in that same category. So there's only about 42 Hectors dolphins off Otago, only about 45 or so in Porpoise Bay. So there are many very small Hectors dolphin populations, but the most famous one is the North Island one, the Maui dolphin one.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so the population is maybe at a third of what you estimated it to be in the 70s,
Yes.
is that right? Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so this is a very common thing to do in fisheries where you look at how many fish, or in this case, how many dolphins have been caught over the years, and therefore how many more must there have been in the 1970s. Yeah, it's about a third now of what it was in the 70s.
So the trend, from what you've just said, the trend is still that the population is going down, yeah?
Well, so the Maui dolphins, some recent research by a guy called Justin Cook suggests they're going down by about 2% per year. Hectors dolphins, the best information we have on that is from Banks Peninsula, where the population was literally nosediving by about 6% per year and is now almost stable. It's kind of somewhere between no change and a 1% decline per year.
Right, yeah. So, and of course, we know that they breed very slowly from your and Steve's work particularly. 3 to 4 years per calf is generally the accepted rule, isn't it? So they breed very slowly, and set netting is particularly considered to be the biggest threat to them, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Set netting is the big one, and trawling is not far behind. We have much less information about trawling. The information about gill netting is better. And this summer, you were just talking about reproduction. We noticed a big drop in the amount of reproduction, like the number of calves that we saw this summer was way lower than before. Was that your experience as well?
We definitely saw less. I mean, it's, as you know, seasonal changes happen. The weather, we had a lot of wind this summer as well, so it was difficult to see them. But the patterns of the behaviour seems to be different. And I mean, you've been watching them for over 30 years, and so you've got a lot of research. For us, I've been doing it for 10 years on the harbour. There's definitely seasonal changes. But yeah, it's hard to know whether the weather influenced it. Climate change is a big thing for people. How much the water temperature is affecting the penguins and other creatures around the peninsula. So that affects the food source as well for the dolphins, the temperatures. So are they further out, like you suggested? Is the population dropping? Are there less babies? We've certainly seen less babies. That's our observational experience.
Yeah, and that's been a real concern. Like, as you say, the smaller numbers of dolphins close to shore could be the most innocent explanation of that, is that it's simply a change in their distribution. This year, the temperatures were lower than the previous few summers, and that's important to some of the fish that they eat, which come inshore to spawn. So it's possible that what was happening was that the fish that the dolphins eat were slower to come inshore, and so the dolphins were slower to come inshore. Yep. But that doesn't explain the very small numbers of calves. So that was a real concern for us, and it's not clear yet what has caused that. It could be something to do with the conditions this year, but of course they are pregnant for about 11 months, so it could just as easily be something that happened to them over the course of the last year, or even maybe feeding conditions have been worse in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So fewer females have become pregnant.
Right.
We're looking into that, but that number of calves is A, a big concern, and B, still a mystery.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, it's lovely to see the calves. It's certainly a real treat to see them when they those first couple of weeks when they do what's called chin slapping, as you've probably seen, when they're not quite sure whether the level of water is leap out of the water to take a breath.
That's so lovely, isn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, so we have seen less of them. One thing I have noticed this year is that outside the harbour, in that hot spot around to the right from the harbour entrance, more dolphins than I've seen ever. So really quite congregated. So like you say, not in the harbour so much, but lots of adult. Where are the babies? Yeah.
Yeah, and we've found, as you know, we do these trips from Akaroa Harbour towards Birdling's Flat, like we go all the way into Birdling's Flat, and then the next day we might do Akaroa Harbour to Le Bons Bay, and then a few days later we drive the boat over the hill to Pigeon Bay, launch it there, and survey the north side of the peninsula. And on those longer trips, like if you're going from Akaroa Harbour to Birdling's Flat, on a good day, you'd expect to see 40 to 60, sometimes 80 to 100 dolphins on that stretch of coastline. And very occasionally, you'll see none at all, or less than 10. And this summer, that was happening all the time. So we would take the boat from Akaroa Harbour to Birdling's Flat and see 6 dolphins.
Wow.
And in the past, that has just been very, very rare. So if right away it was clear the dolphins were not as close to the coast and very different in their distribution, almost like their normal winter distribution. So in winter, they are much more spread out and almost evenly distributed all the way to that 20 nautical mile or 100 metres water depth line. There is still a bit of a preference for close to shore in winter, but in summer that preference becomes really strong. They're really concentrated inshore and they come right inside Akaroa Harbour, right up to the top of the harbour. So this summer that happened much less and much later. And so we were hoping, Steve and myself came back to Dunedin on the early February, 1st or 2nd of February, to start the university year. And the students were still there basically until lockdown.
Yeah.
They almost got stuck there. Anyway, we were hoping that that number of calves would increase during the course of the year. So certainly the dolphins came closer inshore, started being there in their normal, more or less normal summertime distribution pattern in late January and February. But the number of calves never picked up, the students tell us. So that's a real worry actually. So when you look at the last 30 years, the average of calves is about 4%, 4.4%. So that means if you go out there, you see 100 dolphins, then 4 of them would be calves. Yeah. The biggest number we've ever seen was about 8%. And the smallest number we had ever seen until this summer was about 2%, 1.6%. This summer, it was half that previous minimum, so it was 0.8%, closer to 1% than 2%. And so that's never happened before in the last 30 years. It's way lower than anything we've seen before. Yeah, very, very odd, and hopefully we'll get the answer to what's going on there.
Yeah, interesting. So it's looking at patterns and then trying to figure it out, and it's inexpensive as far as time and money to research dolphins. You've got outboard fuel, you've got people's time, and then the research and stuff like that. Black Cat, you've been working alongside with Black Cat for a good portion of those.
About that same amount of time. So it wasn't called Black Cat then, but Akaroa Harbour Cruises, as they were called. Started up in 86, I think it was, 85 or 86. So the first thing we did was that survey with the little rubber duck around the South Island, and then we settled at Banks Peninsula, and at about that same time, Ron and Jarrell Bingham started up Akaroa Harbour Cruises. yeah, it was cool. So we've been working along with them, kind of growing up with them that whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, you've sort of become part of the family, the Bingham and Hectors Dolphin Black Cat family.
Yeah, I think that's been really cool. So they've been very supportive over the years with providing various bits of equipment, including an outboard motor not long ago.
Yeah, nice.
And just being super supportive. So when we were doing those surveys with the larger boat, we had a team of 4 students and Steve and myself for 2 months during the summer. So our boat kind of became a student flat during the summer. And we would, a couple times a week, we would put everybody in the rubber duck and go to the Black Cat place on the wharf, the office on the wharf where people get in and out of their wetsuit to go swimming with the dolphins. And we would all go and have a shower. We make sure that our timing, there wasn't one of your trips coming back with people in their wetsuits at the same time. So yeah, it's been lots of logistic, in kind, as well as financial support.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of your students, we see them backwards and forwards up and down the harbour, taking photographs, photo ID. As you've said, the way you've established how long they live is by taking photo identification of significant permanent features like shark bites on fins and that. And are you about 29 years is about what you reckon they live? Is that the estimate now?
Let's see now. As I recall, so at least 25 years. Yeah. Could be a little longer. So when you get to 25 years old, then as I recall, there is something like 2% of them left. So for 100 dolphins that started out early on in the study, by the time they were 25 years old, only 2% of those were left. So 25 years old for a Hectors dolphin is, I don't know, something like becoming 85 or 90 or something for a human. So certainly not a whole lot of them will make it to between 25 and 30, but somewhere between 25 and 30 is their maximum. Right. They're kind of like 100 years for a human being.
Right. It's possible, but it's not common. Yeah.
Get the postcard from the Queen kind of thing would be happening at about 28, 29 years old. Yeah, for a Hectors dolphin. Yeah.
Yeah, so as far as protecting them, we've talked about trawling and set netting as threats. It's the current process of the threat management plan, which Black Cat and yourself have been closely involved with. What could you sort of outline for us to that process, or where we're at with that, and what needs and what we can do?
Yeah, again, Black Cat have been super helpful with that, coming to meetings. So the process is basically that the government has put out a threat management plan, a draft threat management plan, and then there was a series of meetings to explain the plan to the public, and so people from Black Cat, either Paul Milligan or Paul Bingham, would come to those meetings, and then there was an opportunity to write submissions on that plan, and the next step will be for the Ministers of Fisheries and Conservation to choose one of the options in that threat management plan, or hopefully a bit better, because the best option in the threat management plan was actually not all that sustainable. Anyway, so a decision was originally due sometime late last year, and then it was due early this year, and then of course COVID happened. So I have no idea what the time frame of this will be, but I expect sometime this year, hopefully before the election, there will be a decision by the 2 ministers saying this is what we're going to do to better protect Hectors and Maui dolphins. Nice. And at the same time that they release that decision, they will also release a summary of the submissions. So we'll all be able to see what everybody wrote in their submissions and how closely has the minister's decision matched what people asked them to do, etc.
Yeah, interesting. But my mind goes to the marine reserve, another form of protection. We've got a little marine reserve. It took some locals, about 20 people, nearly 20 years to get that put in place. Yeah. There was some strong opposition from the Māori because they wanted to be able to just continue harvesting food as they've done for many generations. and the recreational fishers. But, that's been in place for just coming up 6 years now. And for myself on the harbour, we've seen last summer was the first time we saw baby seals in the reserve. So,
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, really, really cool. So we've seen more baby penguins, and up until this year, more baby Hectors dolphins as well. So, you only have to look around the world and see that marine reserves do have an impact and improve the environment. And of course, ironically, the adjacent areas where people can fish are benefiting as well because of the increased biodiversity.
All over, so, exactly.
The marine reserves for the Hectors dolphins must have some positive impact as well, a knock-on.
Hopefully, yeah. Marine reserves in general are a bit small for mobile species like dolphins and seabirds and, larger fish like kahawai, for example. But they should definitely have, if anything, a positive effect. So it won't be a huge effect for a species like a dolphin, but it should be positive.
The reserves, yeah. So that's where we need this really big protection. We're currently on the east coast out to 4 nautical miles, which is just on 7 kilometres. But you've been saying that they've been seen out to 20 nautical miles.
Exactly.
So I understand that sort of some of the threat management plan is a little bit piecemeal and well protected here and then absolutely not protected there, and the dolphins actually don't know where that line is. So it's sort of a worst case scenario, really.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
What are you aiming for, and what do you think is ideal? 20 miles is where they tend to be found. What has been suggested, or what are you getting a sense or a feel from the threat management plan so far?
Well, so far the best suggestion I've seen comes from the IUCN. They are the international organisation that lists endangered species as to whether they are endangered or threatened or neither. They have recommended protection out to the 100 metres water depth. So they've said these dolphins are found between the shoreline and 100 metres deep. And that's where you don't need to stop all humans going there or stop all fishing in that area. But you need to ban the 2 fishing methods that are the biggest threat to them. So that's gill nets and trawling. So people could continue fishing in there using long lines, using fish traps, using any other kind of hook and line methods, more selective fishing methods, and in the long run that would actually benefit the fish stocks as well as the dolphins. So in a sense, what's good for the dolphins is good for the fish stocks, and therefore is good for the long-term prognosis for the fishing industry. But of course, trying to get people to do something that's in their long-term interest but maybe not in their immediate short-term profit interest is a tough call.
Yeah, the MPI is thinking about people whose livelihoods rely on fishing, and local fishermen have them in Akaroa, and they're a part of our community that we benefit from. So it is about balancing that, isn't it? And what can we do that benefits everybody down the track, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and around Banks Peninsula, as you mentioned, when you look at the map of where they're proposing protection and where they're not, there's this really weird gap on the southeastern corner of the peninsula that I forget now if it's Paul Bingham or Paul Milligan, but both of them call that the death zone. Yeah. And they have talked to the Minister of Conservation about this, and we had already tried to make that point, but one way or another it got kind of lost. And I guess when we'd written to her and spoken with her, we had a big long list of things to talk to her about, and this point about the death zone had gotten kind of lost in the woods. And so Paul explained this again, and that when you're showing your tourists the dolphins or taking them to go swimming with the dolphins in Akaroa Harbour, you don't really want to have to say to them, oh, and folks, by the way, just offshore over there, there are people killing these dolphins in fishing nets. And also one of the Pauls, I forget which one, at some point said, excuse me, you think it's okay to be killing one of these dolphins a week? So the Ministry for Primary Industries is trying to kind of find a balance between these economic and ecological pressures, but they're going way too far over towards the economic, as you might expect.
Yeah.
From a Ministry of Fisheries or a Ministry of Primary Industries. And of course, there's then debate between that minister and the Minister of Conservation. And so, I mean, from here on in, it's all politics and a bit difficult to predict what will come out of it. But I've got my fingers and toes crossed that we're going to get something close to the IUCN option.
Well, the best possible. I mean, that whole death zone, to me, it's a little bit like putting a fence around most of a school or a childcare area and saying the kids are safe most of the time, but they can play on the road here.
there you are. Yeah, I like that analogy. That's a good
and I'm sure the parents probably wouldn't be very happy about the kids playing on the road in some areas of the school. Yeah. So that remains to be seen. We've got to get through this transition, this new normal of COVID, and see how things unfold, see how the threat management plan unfolds. But on a lighter note, what are some of the great things that you've seen out there, Liz? You know, you've spent over 30 years on the water. What are some of your great memories and maybe some of the most precarious moments?
Good question. What I'm going to try and do is to share my screen with you so that you can see a little bit of video. Here we go. We've got to get it scary and technical here, but this should work. And then we'll go here.
Here we go. I can see these things. Yep, I've got you there as well.
Can you see? I
can see dolphin surfing and you in the research boat and a video.
So fingers crossed that people back home can see this.
Yeah.
So the little video at the bottom left there is in Goffs Bay at Banks Peninsula, and that was this summer using a little drone, a little Mavic drone, and now you see the boat come into view and a picture of that same boat on the right there.
Yeah.
The picture on the top left there is from Porpoise Bay.
Tuwaiwai?
Near Tuwaiwai, yeah, Curio Bay, near, so on the south coast, kind of on the southeastern corner of, here we go, I'm going to try and just start that video up again, there we go. So yeah, I took the class of marine mammal students there, would have been a week or two before lockdown, so like just in time.
Yeah.
So we took these 15 students in a couple of vans to Porpoise Bay, and Max Harvey was there doing his master's project on the dolphins in Porpoise Bay. So there you can literally just walk on the beach and see Hectors dolphins, and that of course is still allowed so long as you live in Porpoise Bay and so long as you only go with people from your household. Yeah, I wonder what's next for us, do you think, Julian? Like, if we are allowed freer movements, if level 3 comes on next week, and then they're talking about now it's not that only things that are essential can be open, but things that can be done safely can be open. So how practical would that be for you? Could you take
I think level 3, we won't be doing any, which is why it's great to be able to essentially connect here and dream about what do we want to do. We've been lucky enough to stay on holiday in our homes as we are, and if we're lucky, we can work from home. And connect like this, and social media has certainly been a godsend for most people, I think.
Oh my goodness.
Stay connected. Looking forward, obviously the borders will not be opening for a while, so we're going to be relying on local tourism, on the people.
Of course, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, because a lot of your tourists are international.
That's right, but we have had an ongoing local tourism. You know, New Zealanders love coming to Akaroa, Christchurch people love coming to Akaroa, so level 3 would mean people can move within Canterbury. I'm not sure tourism would be operating under level 3.
Okay.
I'm pretty certain it won't be. But we're sort of dreaming of a better future down the track when we do have that freedom. I think you'd have to have level 1 off before we get anyone in internationally. But there's a lot of people in New Zealand. I mean, there was an advertisement many years ago, don't leave home till you've seen the country. Well,
exactly.
Staycations are going to be what people are doing once their lives have got some stability and financial stability as well. But You know, I'm itching to get out on the harbour. It's a beautiful place to be, sea caves and sea cliffs. And I even saw in that video that you were running there, a giant petrel flying underneath the camera there, which are the nemesis of the little blue penguins.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, unfortunately, their numbers have increased over the last couple of years, and the blue penguin numbers.
They seem to have. Yeah, I agree. We're seeing way more giant petrels now. I mean, this is anecdotal, so I haven't got any numbers to back this up. But, yeah, that makes sense. I've been noticing that too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they know that one of the benefits for the penguins is that their numbers have increased because of protection, but the giant petrels have recognised that as well. So there's a death zone outside the sanctuary for the penguins, where the giant petrels are waiting for them to come out there. So we don't want a second death zone for the Hectors Dolphins.
No.
But yes, so looking forward, once people start moving locally within New Zealand, I think people are going to want to get out and explore. And Akaroa, as you know, is a beautiful place to come to. So we're looking forward to seeing people, once they're able to move around, to come out and see us. And we may have some special rates for people as well, I imagine.
I was thinking, yeah, you might put on some kind of special deal for locals or something. Just to
well, we already do, as you know, with Sea Week, we run free talks with you, free trips in Littleton and Akaroa. It's always really well supported. We offer free trips to people to come out because the community, a small community, works together, and so we appreciate that what the community does to support Black Cat. So it's great to have locals coming out and seeing, because a lot of people haven't been out on the harbour, even though they've lived there all their lives. So now that people aren't going to Fiji during the winter and wherever else they were planning to, there are some beautiful places in this country that the rest of the world comes to see.
Exactly.
So once we're able to move, let's go and see that. Let's come and have a look at this beautiful doorstep, beautiful backyard.
I think that'll be lovely, yeah. So we're dying to get back to Akaroa sometime soon, either us ourselves or our students, to collect a couple of bits of equipment. So there's a camera on the hillside by 9 Fathom Point, as you know, that takes a photograph of the harbour every couple of minutes to see what's going on in terms of tourism and other boating traffic. And so that'll be so interesting to see what's been happening during lockdown, because there would have been a massive decrease in the amount of boating. And of course, cruise ships basically stopped coming, I guess, from about early March, or certainly mid.
Right, yeah.
So there's that piece of equipment. That just means walking along and going to that camera and taking the chip out and putting a new chip in. And the other piece of equipment is a recorder, a teapot, they're called. They're a kind of a tube with a hydrophone at one end, batteries in there, and a little data logger in there that finds out how many dolphins have been using the area. It's also off 9 Fathom Point. And so that will be telling us also about what's going on with the dolphins as well as with the boat traffic.
Well, we've been
so the students have had to kind of run away when we got that 48 hours of warning.
Yeah.
And so we talked on the phone with them about what should we do with these bits of equipment. Shall we haul them in quickly or leave them out? And we decided it actually be very valuable to find out what's going on during lockdown.
Yeah, it's like a standard way of balancing.
Exactly.
Like when we're not there. Yeah.
Like a control, they would call it.
That was the word I was looking for.
Sort of presence, absence. So one of the things Will Carome is looking at for his master's study is there a difference in dolphin distribution in the harbour and elsewhere from, for example, the time that tourism started, and we don't have a whole lot of data from before any kind of tourism started, but we have data from before dolphin swimming started, data from before the cruise ships started turning up, and now the kind of during, with everything happening. And so this COVID thing, bad as it is actually providing accidentally, it's providing this after data. So now we have a before, during, and an after. Yes. So that'll be really interesting.
It will be. And I imagine, like I said earlier when we first went online, dolphins do remember boats. When boats that have been away for 6 months come back, they race and say, "Whoa, they're back!" So perhaps we're going to do a little bit of the boats are back.
Hope so.
You know, for once we start operating again, there might be some really interesting things to see. And around the world, we've seen images of cities with wildlife coming in, encroaching into areas where there's no more any cars. So it could be really interesting to have a look.
Wow. I haven't seen that. So online, I've seen some images of air pollution over China before COVID and during. But you're saying there's also information about animals moving into places where there are roads.
Absolutely, yeah. I've seen. I mean, you've got to be careful when were these images taken, but from commentators, you know, deer on the streets in Japan coming out of the wild here. There is the downside of there's obviously wildlife which has been relying on tourism for being fed, and they're not getting fed at the moment. So hopefully, they've found natural ways of feeding themselves. So that's why they say don't feed the ducks, don't feed the animals. But yeah, we've been away, and the dolphins are curious. So I think once we get back on the water, we're going to be welcomed back out there.
And the other tricky thing, I guess, with these deer that are wandering around in the streets in Japan is that when the cars start moving again, people will have to be really careful because these animals don't know that the lockdown is off.
That's right.
And they should be expecting people to be whizzing around there at 50 kilometres or 80 kilometres.
I think this whole process has been a reset for a lot of people, and it's like, whoa, spending time with family and communicating and getting out of nature. I've never seen so many people walking, cycling with their families. We haven't been able to get close to people physically, but we've been able to connect with them. So I think people have gone, actually, what sort of a world do we want to create? So as far as wildlife, you mentioned lack of pollution. We've actually got to see what sort of world can we create if we decide to, together, all of us. So this is an opportunity which we can do things differently. We've been made to do things differently. Now we've got a chance. What choices are we going to make as individuals? What sort of world do we want to live?
Yeah, and also, I guess, I mean, right now, the government is kind of scrambling to try to help people and help industries and what have you. So there's a lot of public funding, like taxpayer money, going to help businesses survive this COVID era. And what I would like to see is that they put that money towards truly sustainable businesses. You know, so if you're talking energy, it would be nice if they would put that money towards people who are using renewable energy or insulating their house or whatever, rather than propping up, say, oil companies or we may differ on this particular score, but, you know, like public funding for a company like Air New Zealand is obviously your business relies on that for bringing tourists to New Zealand. But it would be good if we could have a bit more emphasis on cycle tracks, and public transport is going to be another really tricky one because we all want people into public transport, but the trouble is they won't want to because it's really risky with the disease. Yeah,
there'll definitely be a transitional period, but it's certainly given us an opportunity to rethink how we want to live in our world and how big our footprint is.
Yes.
And where we're
I think there will be a lot of positives. I hope there will be a lot of positives coming out of it. As far as personal transport, they've just been building this beautiful cycle track along Portobello Road where I live.
Love Portobello.
And so my solution will be to get an e-bike with a little dog trailer for Sky. And that's how I'll be getting to work as soon as this cycle path is completed. So I understand that they're looking for shovel-ready projects. Well, this one is not just shovel-ready, it's 99% complete.
Wow.
So I expect that as soon as the serious lockdown period is over, they'll go back to fixing that cycle track along the road, and then I'll be out there on my e-bike. Yeah, I can't wait. Because until now, basically, you've had to mix it. I do occasionally cycle in, but you have to mix it with cars, and it's a big road, so it's like they're whizzing past you at 80 kilometres an hour on some parts of that road. It's really dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I've certainly been enjoying getting out on the bike, and our footpaths have been extended by a considerable amount with the roads being pretty much empty. So to be able to get out on the bikes is great.
Of course, yeah, cool.
Yeah, so would it be great? We've got a beautiful harbour out there for people to come back to. You're going to come back. When did you say you're coming back to Akaroa?
Well, really, as soon as it's allowed to go and collect those 2 bits of equipment. So I guess we'll hear on Monday what will happen on Thursday, exactly how far are people allowed to travel, and then we will wait to see what the university has to say about that. And so I expect that what will happen is that certainly large classes like 80, 100 students will continue online until at least the end of the first semester, which is the end of May. Small classes may or may not start up again, and I expect people will be allowed into their office again and probably will be allowed to do lab work again and hopefully also field work. So as soon as that's allowed, then we'll get in the car and drive to Banks Peninsula, go and collect the sound recorder and the chip out of the camera. And I think the students are planning to come back in the middle of winter, but I need to check with them about that.
Well, hopefully we're all going to be out and about relatively soon, and we'll be able to meet up socially without keeping it 2 metres.
Yes.
And people travelling around New Zealand and getting to explore this country. So we're looking forward. We've got a beautiful harbour there for people to come and join us. We'll be seeing you. And perhaps people who are coming out with Black Cat, they may see you out on the water, or perhaps out with us.
That's what I was going to say is if it would be at all useful during the kind of, come on people, come and enjoy your backyard, come out on the Black Cat, then let us know. We could organise, even though it won't be called Sea Week, we could organise a couple of trips over a weekend and do a kind of, let's get back into it and see those.
Well, we could change the spelling to C-E-S-E-E, Sea Week. Come and see the dolphins. What's changed out there? Are they really excited to see us? Yeah. Well, Liz, it's been great having you to be able to talk with you today, and we will be seeing you once we are open. Maybe if we lock down too much longer, maybe we'll do some more of this.
That'd be lovely.
So to our viewers, thanks for joining us. And if we're still in lockdown when you see this, stay home, stay safe, be kind. It's a great message from our leader to be kind. And so let's create a kinder world for the wildlife and for ourselves, and a better world going forward.